How's everybody today? Good. I'm Joan Melanson, Director of Program Promotion at Long-Term Care Partners, and we're the administrator of the Federal Long-Term Care Insurance Program, the FLTCIP, since everybody has an acronym in the government, and Benefeds, which is the portal for dental and vision federal programs. 2012 marks our 10th anniversary of the FLTCIP, so we're very excited. It's the largest long-term care insurance program in the country, and it's your federal benefit. There are some 270,000 federal family members that have taken the opportunity to take control of their future long-term care needs. We finished a very successful open season in 2010 last year, but never fear, just because you missed the open season opportunity, if you're not already enrolled in our program, you can apply at any time. With 10 years under our belt right now, we have over 9,000 claimants collecting almost $200 million in claims and covering their long-term care costs. And that's the business that we're in, to assist in paying for the high cost of long-term care. Now, you can apply at any time, so please stop by our booth. We're out there with everybody else, or go to our website at www.ltcfeds.com. And you can learn more about the program using our online consultant tools. We have a very comprehensive webinar series, and we have other tools to help you make an informed decision about long-term care and how it can impact your retirement planning. So why have we partnered with Government Exec over all these years? And we've been involved for about 7 or 8 years now. Your conferences tackle the same kinds of issues we all face, like the ones we will discuss in this session: mobility into new jobs, promoting creativity and innovation as all of us continually seek to acquire new skills to meet the changing environment using new technology. It is my pleasure today to introduce Jeff Neal, who is a Senior Vice President in ICF's Human Capital and Management Consulting Services. Prior to ICF, Mr. Neal was the Development of Homeland Security. He was the Chief Human Capital Officer, CHICO. As Principal Human Capital Advisor to the Secretary of Homeland Security and CHICO for Department of Homeland Security, Mr. Neal was responsible for human capital programs for a department of 190,000 civilian employees. Mr. Neal substantially reduced operating costs and established department-wide programs for leader development, making workforce sourcing decisions and human capital policy development. Mr. Neal has served as Director of Human Resources for the Defense Logistics Agency from 2000 to 2009. Mr. Neal identified more than $5 million in savings. That's a transformation cited by the Partnership for Human Service as a model for other agencies. He created the Enterprise Leader Development Program to address the critical leadership skills required in today's workplace. So without further ado, Mr. Neal.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How is everyone today? I'd like to just briefly introduce my colleagues up here. On my left, Angie Bailey, Associate Director of the Office of Personnel Management. Angie is a career senior executive with multiple years of federal service. We don't say how much anymore. Angie and I were colleagues at the Defense Logistics Agency many years ago. After leaving DLA, Angie moved on to be the head of HR for the Defense Contract Management Agency, and then moved to OPM, where she's had progressively responsible positions and has now ended up as an associate director, which is one of the most senior positions in OPM. Angie is responsible for much of the HR policy for the federal government. So quite a coup to have you as a part of this panel.
Thank you.
And on my right is Bill Bransford, General Counsel of the Senior Executives Association. The Senior Executives Association has been looking out for the interests of senior executives for more than
Since 1980.
For 32 years now, and almost as long as there has been a senior executive service. And so I'm delighted to have Bill here as well. I'd like to start out just by talking briefly about the history of the senior executive service and what it was intended to be. And do we think it actually fulfilled that promise? Early on, the senior executive service was intended to be a very flexible, very senior cadre of the most senior career members of the civil service. And the idea was that you would see higher risk in those positions. These are positions that used to be GS positions. They were called super grades. Anybody remember super grades? There are some folks who remember super grades. The super grades were done away with. The senior executive service was created. And the idea was you would have this higher risk, not totally risky job, but this high risk position with higher reward. And as a result, the federal government would see an improvement in quality of leadership and see better results for the American people. So that's what was intended when the Civil Service Reform Act created the SES. Did it live up to the promise? Bill?
Well, in part it has, because when you did away with GS 16s, 17s, and 18s and all that went with it, the person having a right to their position, don't take me out of I'm a 17, don't put me in a 16 job, and you had a lot of pushback and people saying you can't do that, you can't do this. And so the SES was designed to create a flexible cadre of leaders. And in that sense, I mean, the legal constraints have been done away with, and senior executives can be easily reassigned with just 15 days notice for a non-geographic move, which is often waived. And the whole idea of whether you're in a 16 or 17 or, that nobody thinks that way anymore except at DOD where they put tiers in. So in that sense, it has. Now, the risk-reward issue is a whole another question, because senior executives at one point in time around 1990, maybe for 7-8 years or so, well, until 1983 or 2003, actually made more money than GS 14s and 15s, significantly more. Then, with the 2003 reform, with senior executive service, the locality pay was done away with, so the bottom was dropped out, and every pay raise was discretionary. So the rewards are not as clear. And then, the pay cap was limited, and GS 14, 15 pay kept rising. At NSPS, at DOD, you had people going even higher. So the reward part has kind of gotten away from us. It's not there like it used to be. And the risk part is like it always was, at least in the law, although I think, I believe in recent years and what we've seen at SEA, and we've seen it anecdotally primarily, but we see a much greater risk of career people as they deal with their political leaders. It becomes more and more difficult for them to know where they stand and for them to know what's expected and to feel good about the way they're treated.
Angie, Bill covered the risk and the reward part. What about the results part?
Well, if I may just go back on the risk and the rewards, I think the original intent of the SES core, where it was to be a government cadre of folks that were easily able to, I'll call it deployed, but deployed to where they were needed to meet the needs. I think that original intent kind of waned a little bit whenever we started seeing those as less about leadership and more about technical. So we seem to fall in this trap of hiring the SES that were really, really good within their respective fields, almost treating them more as super technicians or super leaders, and I mean as in a leader role, not so much a leadership. And I think one of the things that we would really like to see is this move back toward the original vision, which was more of a cadre of leaders who could go out and could handle major issues that go on throughout the federal government. So those are some of the things that we'd like to see happen over the next few years, is move more toward that. Now, with regard to the risk, there's no doubt about it that in many SES positions, and no two SES positions are created equally. I mean, that's just a fact of life. No two positions are created equally. So I think in some positions you'll see a lot of risk associated. And when I say risk, it's not so much about risk and what they do, but the programs and the operations and the things that they run are highly, diverse enough in an area where risk is just apparent, or inherent within the position. And the rewards beyond the money, I'm not sure that everybody is an SES for the money, that it's all about the bonuses or it's all about the pay. Sometimes the rewards are things that you can't perhaps, that aren't tangible. The reward of having, over 300 to 500 people that you're responsible for, of growing and developing, that's very rewarding. The reward of taking a risky program, and while it may stumble, you're able to turn it around. I'm here to speak. I can speak on that with USA Jobs. There's not a person in this room that doesn't know that was, something that was under my leadership. Talk about risk. Yeah, they were there. Talk about stumbling a bit. Yep, sure did. But then we turned it around. And there's no greater reward than to take something and collaborate with a lot of other highly talented SES senior leaders, both political and career, and turn something around in a very short period of time. So I think it's all in how you look at this, and I'm not sure it's as black and white as just rewards and risk. I think that it's a much broader picture.
You mentioned having responsibility for 500 people. All of us have probably seen SES positions where they have responsibility for 10 people and a budget of a few $1,000,000. And I remember back when I had hair and the super grades existed, it was rare to see one in the field. You just didn't see super grades. And in the early days of the SES, you didn't see a lot of SES positions out in the field. And even in Washington, there would be people who would be kind of in awe when they met somebody who was in an SES position. People aren't in awe necessarily of SESs anymore. Are there too many?
I don't know if there's too many, but I think that we definitely need to look at the kinds of positions that the SES are in, because I really do. There's also the SL and the ST, and I don't think that they're used enough. So there tends to be this got to get from GS 15 to an SES, but sometimes I think we don't think enough about the fact that we have the SL and the ST, which are truly meant to fill a different niche, if you will, than actually the SES. So I think that a relook at some of that by each of the agencies would be good. One of the things that we have noticed where the SES has kind of moved away from the initial vision is not only are they more technical, they also became more of an agency asset. And once they became agency assets, there was this desire to hold on to them and to not let them go, because it was seen that if you moved them or something, that it was almost like a punishment, not really a reward. And so one of the things that we would really like to see within OPM is this move back toward them being seen more as a government cadre that can actually be moved to meet some of the different needs. And therefore, perhaps we wouldn't need all of the SES positions that we have that have such a lower level of responsibility.
You said can be moved. Do you mean as in the agency saying we want you to go there, or as in the senior executive saying I want to go there?
Both. I don't think it's I think it's both. I would love to see where if we had an issue, like for example, with an earthquake or an oil spill or a Katrina or any number of things, there is so much talent that's out there that could be brought to bear that while they may not have the exact technical skill, they could be brought in for their leadership skill. Like perhaps they're really good at community as a community planner, or perhaps they're really good at just knowing how to get the right network together to get things accomplished. That would be a beautiful thing if we could actually I call it deploy, but where we could deploy the SES to go in, take care of something, and then perhaps they come back to their, back to their original agency or not, or stay there.
Bill, what do you think?
I think it sounds very utopic, and I think it's wonderful. But how do you do it? How do you implement that? And since the late 1990s, the Senior Executives Association has proposed that OPM contain a job bank type listing of the capabilities, the abilities of senior executives government-wide, so that in fact agencies could use those resources in that kind of a circumstance. And if they did, and it would be one of those things where you change the culture. Right now there's a lot of talk about mobility. Should it be a requirement to go into the SES? ODNI is doing that. There's legislation in the Senate that's being considered to require that. Should you have that mobility? But it doesn't seem like that you necessarily should. if it's not actually required, sometimes it makes a difference. It makes things better. But I do agree with Angie on the SLST that maybe we could put more positions there.
Do either of you know roughly what percentage of senior executives actually have experience outside their agency?
I don't
No.
know. I know the Partnership for Public Service just did a survey on it, but I'm not sure that they actually came up with that percentage.
Mm-hmm.
What they did say was that there were a fairly low percentage of people that had been in their jobs for an average of 4 years or less that had experience in other agencies, in the SES.
The last numbers I saw were that less than 10% of senior executives actually had experience outside of the agency they're a senior executive in. And I wonder, is that a problem or is that a strength? That they're experts in their agency, they know the agency through and through, or is it a problem that they are perhaps limited by the perspective of their agency?
I think it's both.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do think it's both. I think from a challenge standpoint is if you've never been anywhere else, then it's kind of hard to bring new ideas or new thinking because that's all you ever really know. On the other hand, some of the agencies with their missions are so broad, you could spend a whole career in DoD and get a wide variety of missions. You know, everything from DLA to contracting
Right.
to the Army, Navy, you name it. But some of the smaller agencies, I'm not so sure that you do. You get a very pure look at things, and I worry about that. I think for example, within OPM, I like that we're moving more toward this mix of folks that have agency experience and then those who have kind of sort of grown up, if you will, in OPM, because we have this unique mission of kind of being the mothership of personnel, so you better know what the heck you're doing if you're going to be in one of those jobs. But on the other hand, you got to have a perspective of the agencies, and if you've never been anywhere else, I think that makes it extremely difficult.
What do you think?
But I think some agencies like HUD or the Securities and Exchange Commission, where they have a very specific mission to themselves, I don't know that requiring mobility necessarily makes sense. But in a lot of other agencies, DHS, for example, I think, and Treasury, DOD, it maybe makes sense at least to get some range of experience. I think that helps you perform better as a senior executive, no question about it. I do believe that one of the problems with mobility now is that it's not consistent with the culture that's in most agencies. So if you change that culture, if OPM had a job bank, they could change the culture by saying, oh, that person's desirable, they're on this OPM list, the agency recruited them, they weren't trying to get away. Right now, agencies don't want to release their best resources, so they only release those who they can afford to let go, so there's a stigma that goes with it. So you have to change that culture some, and in order, the idea of requiring mobility to get into the SES is part of that, changing that culture, but how do you do it? Because agencies aren't going to let people go, they're not going to pay for it, so if you're going to require it, at a minimum, you ought to do it in a way where people have the opportunity to get the interagency or intersector experience, and that resources are put into paying for it. Because one of the big issues on getting mobility is who pays for it at OD&I? Somebody goes from one agency to another. Who pays for it when they're there, and when they come back, what do they do? These are all difficult to resolve issues that really haven't been resolved yet.
Yeah, it's over the years I've been offered a number of free SESs, people who could be reassigned to work for me, and I discovered that those are not free, that they do come with a cost, and generally I didn't want the folks were very willing to give me. I wanted the ones that they said, no, never in a million years, you can't have her. You can have him, you can't have her. So I wanted the ones they didn't want to give up. One of the things that people say a lot is, and I've heard this a lot, is that some of the most effective senior executives are the ones who've moved around a fair amount. And I will disclose here a bias. Angie and I have both worked in multiple departments. Some people would say that made us more effective. Some people would say we couldn't hold a job. So I don't know which it was. But is it that the experience of going from one agency to another and having the exposure in multiple agencies causes a person to be more effective? Or is it that the personality type that seeks out those kinds of experiences is actually better suited to being a senior executive in the federal government?
Well, that's a really good a good question. So speaking of can't hold down a job, one time I was at a family reunion and my mom pulled me aside and she said, "And your uncles, they're a little worried about you. They really wonder why you can't keep a job." And I was like, wow, they think I can't keep a job, but it's when you start moving, and this was all within defense, moving different places and for different agencies, but, to a certain group of folks, that was seen as not having company loyalty because you kept moving all the time. But I think the question is good. Is it the experience or is it the person who likes to move? Me personally, I love the challenges of something new. And it could be my DoD upbringing, which is up and out, up and out. The 3 years if you're not moving. Whereas, like I said, OPM's culture is a little bit different, where what they value is this institutionalized knowledge, because it's incredibly important that the person who wrote the Veterans Preference Rules, for example, might be there for a very long time to help administer those and provide the intent and the history and things like that. So there's this wonderful balance that I think goes on of having both people that want to stay and have institutionalized knowledge and valuing what they bring to the table, and valuing those folks who, have moved around and can bring to the table something different. When I first got to OPM, that was my first SES job, and I will be the first to admit, I came there with the bias thinking, what the heck do these OPM people know? They haven't been out in the field. They don't know what it's like to work in an agency and how we don't pay any attention to what they write and stuff. That was my bias, whenever I showed up. And I tell you, and their bias of me was, she's from the field, what the heck could she possibly know? They're all idiots out in the field. We know what we're doing, kind of thing. And so we had these wonderful, wonderful creative tension kind of sessions where we mixed those two things together. And I think at the end of the day, we delivered things like hiring reform, like a new USA jobs, veterans initiatives, pathways, PMF. So many things got delivered because of this infusion of institutionalized knowledge and people who had experienced and been somewhere different. And so that's what I think is not seeing this stuff as black and white, but seeing what does someone bring to the table and what is it that we can do to turn that into something really good on behalf of the American public.
Okay. We talked a little bit about where the senior executive service came from and the ideas behind it. If we fast forward to 2012 and look at some of the challenges the SES is facing now, is it desirable today to be an SES? Is it something that if you're a GS 5 you should aspire to be?
Jeff, it's interesting that the Senior Executives Association has been hearing since 2005 that GS 14s and 15s are losing interest in coming into the SES. We've been hearing it on an anecdotal basis. And that coincides with the implementation of the new, what we then I still call it the new pay system, because I had so many years under the old one. But the system where pay levels were done away with, where the bottom dropped out of the SES pay range and locality pay was done away with, to summarize. So there is this, what appears to be this loss of interest. We did a couple of surveys of our members. We did a survey of our members. OPM did a survey of the Senior Executive Service, and both of those surveys revealed among SESers that they were feeling that way. So the Senior Executives Association a couple of years ago did a survey of GS 14s and 15s. And what we found is that they are, in fact, losing interest in coming into the SES. There are 12,500 people that took the survey. We had a lot of help from the Human Capital Officers Council in getting people to fill it out. We had 4,000 comments to read. And what we found out is the detractors to the SES outweighed the attractors. And the detractors were work-life balance, were the mobility, the threat of geographic reassignment, and the complicated, burdensome application process. The attractors were the things Angie mentioned, which the Senior Executives Association is constantly trying to tell potential senior executives and to remind its members. the great programs they operate and how rewarding being a senior executive is. Those were the attractors. But basically, the people that took the survey as a group found that the detractors outweighed the attractors. And when we read the 4,000 comments, what we found is that it was the difference in pay was not enough to overcome the detractors. And when you think about it, 155.5 is the current pay. It's been that for a little while now for GS 15 Step 10 in the Washington area. Senior executive can make anywhere from 118 to 179.8, and some of them are well below that 155.5. So GS 15 Step 5 can have have an alternative work schedule, gets comp time for travel, a lot of things that senior executives don't receive. So we find that, especially that work-life balance, that in fact there is that loss of interest. And we're finding, when we talk to people on promotion panels, that they are really becoming less and less satisfied with the applicants for senior executive service jobs. So we think the big challenge, is recruiting that next generation of government leaders.
Angie, what do you think?
Having just gone through filling one of the SES positions that actually is on my staff, and looking at the applications that came in, it is interesting. We went to the resume only, that we're a pilot of, we're touting and everything, because folks had said it was so complicated. And I think the thing that concerned me is that so many of the resumes of the folks who applied, I wouldn't really see them as quite qualified. That, yeah, maybe they had really good leadership skills, but I just thought that they were missing some really core knowledge of the HR profession. Again, that's what OPM does for a living, so it'd be no different than on a flight line. You'd want to make sure that, your top SES on a flight line knew something about aircraft. And so that was the one thing that it seems like there needs to be a balance somewhere between this pure leadership and then pure technical, and somehow we have to get that a little bit better. When I joined the SES Corps, I was quite proud to join the SES Corps. I didn't really think about the money. The truth is that my first paycheck, believe it or not, I actually lost money. It was a tax code error. But anyhow, I was like, wow, I didn't know joining I knew I wasn't going to get this huge pay raise, but I didn't know I was going to lose money doing it, and so, but anyhow, I get that fixed for the next pay period. But it was never, so this is just me speaking, it was never about the money. I mean, I make really good money compared to a lot of Americans. And so it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the rewards. I grew up in the Army. If you got $150 as an award, you were so lucky. And so, that's the background under which I came from growing up. I didn't grow up in the DC environment. And so, it just was really, really, to me, about leading these really large, complex operations and leading a group of people and helping to develop them and watching them grow and watching some of those folks go on to be SES somewhere else or GS-15s or whatever. So I think it's all in who you are and how you approach it. I'll be a little provocative and say that if the 14s and 15s, if it's all about the pay and they don't want it for those reasons, then I'm not sure that we want them in the SES Corps either, because it has to be about something more than just your pay. It has to be about the value that you're bringing to the folks that you're going to lead and to the nation that you're trying to uplift and provide great value to. And that's, maybe I'm Pollyanna. Maybe I just see the world differently, but that's just who I am. And I work with, I got to tell you, the SES that I personally work with, to a person, I think would sit here and tell you the same thing, that that they really, really value the job that they have, and they love the fact that there's a legacy that they're going to leave behind. Take Steve Shee and the work that he's doing with the SES. To him, it's like he's leaving behind, a legacy. Jerry Mikowitz, he is like the king of pay. That guy knows more about pay than anybody. And so it's just, there's a level of pride that I think that comes with some of these jobs, and I think we need to capitalize on that pride and instill that back into the SES.
I don't disagree with any of that, but I think it's really a shame as people, I hear the talk that goes on in a lot of federal workplaces that, and we talked about it before we came on, the best deal in government now is to be a non-supervisory GS-15. And people talk that way
Absolutely,
in the
they
federal
do.
workplace. And so you get this culturalization process where you have a lot of quality GS-15s who are just simply not filling out the applications, people who would be good senior executives. So, to dismiss them as, well, we don't really want them anyway, I think is ignoring the fact that we've gone from a system that until 2005, people wanted to be in the SES, and now many of them don't. It's sort of like an Army colonel not wanting to be a general, and that's unheard of. That's just not with the system, and yet that's what we have in the civil service today, with many people who are potential SESers not wanting to get in.
I wonder how much of that is because of what's going on with government today, with pay freezes, with public service not necessarily being viewed as a good thing to do, as a noble calling, as it used to be. And how much of it is a change in our society, where some people are deciding that a promotion isn't necessarily worth it. That, I used to work in the Department of Homeland Security, and we used to kid around that we believed in a good work-life balance there, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And a lot of people who I would try to recruit would say, I don't necessarily want to do that because I've got a family. My kids are 2 and 4. And if I take this job and I spend all this time at work, by the time I can actually put my head up and look around, my kids will be 18 and 20. And I will have missed all of their
Right.
most important years. And a better job and a better title and a few dollars more isn't worth it. How much of it is the society changing?
I think that that's an excellent point, and I want to make sure that I'm a little clear on something. I don't mean to leave the impression that we don't want them, folks who don't. The point I'm really trying to make is that I don't want it to be just about the pay to become an SES. That's all. So I just want to make sure that for all the media, that I was not at all intending to say that we do not want folks, the 14s and 15s who are displeased with it. Because I think what you're hitting on is actually kind of the point, is that culturally, I think that we're moving. In fact, you hear that even from folks, the younger generation, that it's, work-life balance is really important to them. I didn't actually seek out an SES position until I felt like my kids were at an age in which I could do that. Mm-hmm. So you might say, well, that's because you're a woman and you do that kind of thing. No, I spent my whole career traveling. My husband actually spent most of the time making sure that the kids got on the bus and got where they needed to be, because in DOD we traveled a lot. And so it's not that, it's just that personally, I timed things in such a way that I thought I could dedicate more of myself to my job. And so, it could just be that some of these 14s and 15s, and maybe we have held focus groups with them, but to find out from them, beyond just checking off about the pay, is it more that you're trying to balance this work life with a little bit more pay, and it's just not worth it? And what I'd like to say to that group is, it's okay. That it's okay if you don't want to be an SES. I think maybe that's where the SLST comes in. Maybe that's where you're just a top-notch 15, and we value that instead of constantly this feeling that every 14 and 15 needs to be an SES. Sometimes I think what we need is those who truly want to be SES to be there, and those who don't, then we find the right home and place for them.
But when you have quality people who would apply if it was more attractive, then the American people are losing if that person doesn't come into the SES.
So what do we do to make it more attractive?
Well, we have a couple of proposals the Senior Executives Association does. Senator Akaka just introduced legislation a few weeks ago that would, number one, actually increase the stature of the senior executive service by requiring that certain positions be filled by career people rather than politicals. Jeff, for example, was a political appointee at DHS, and he even engineered change in that requirement, where the Chico at DHS is now filled by a career person. We're actually trying to do that government-wide in this legislation. We're trying to change the performance and management, pay and performance management system so that it's more transparent, so that when pay raises resume, senior executives will get a pay raise if their performance is fully successful or better, equal to the average GS increase. We're trying to have performance awards included in the high 3 for senior executives, because that is really a part of a SESer's pay. We're trying to require statutorily onboarding, a great program that OPM has started on a trial basis. We would like to see that implemented throughout government. More done on career development. We'd like to see the Steve Shee's office, the SES resource office, put in a statute so that it could be required, so that we could help develop a government-wide cadre. These are some of the things that we think would make a difference. And I personally believe the one that would make a tremendous difference in getting the GS 14 and 15 thinking about being a senior executive is if their performance awards, knowing that SESers get larger awards than the general schedule, if those could be included in the high 3 for annuities, they could start thinking my annuity could go up if I got into the SES, and your better performers would get the performance awards. Those would be the ones that would apply, and I think it would make a difference for those employees who are not now applying.
You mentioned the better performers. When we look at performance for an SES, I think OPM recently made some changes, or is in the process of making changes, to focus more on results, and the SES getting results. Should the performance evaluation that drives those bonuses, should that be based on the individual contributions of that senior executive, or should we find some way to measure the effectiveness of their organization and the results their organization gets, and whatever their organization that they're leading gets is their rating? So that way you can't say that everybody who works for me is lousy, but I'm wonderful.
Right. Yeah, it kind of reminds me like going through the budget cycle. I've always seen, times whenever for the budget, it's like if I don't have this, X is going to fail. But then and they don't get the money. But then come performance appraisal time, it's outstanding despite not having the money. And so I really think that it should be about the overall organization's results. I don't think it should be about the individual. I think the EVS results should come into play as well, because
EVSs?
Employee Viewpoint Survey, I think that those results should come into play, because look, you can't lead an organization and deliver on all results and leave dead bodies behind. I mean, you have to make sure that at the same time you're bringing your workforce up, at the same time that you're leading and delivering. And so it really, there's a lot of science out there that says that pay for performance works incredibly well in a production type environment, but when you get into these more collaborative type environments, which is what we work in, it's all about being able to pull folks together and make things happen. And I really think that the performance for the SES should be all inclusive, which is why we're going toward results. So like if you looked at my performance standards, you would see results that I have to achieve on behalf of the Veterans Initiative, or improving manager satisfaction, or hiring reform. I don't own or control any of that, but I have the ability to influence it and to lead it and to lead the agencies to their kind of performance. So I think that that's really something Director Berry has done that's incredibly important, is that he's placed on us this, our performance standards are a reflection of where we take the federal government, not just where I personally perform.
But there has to be some relationship back to that individual executive's performance. There's certainly, by statute now, they're responsible and they're supposed to be evaluated not only on their individual performance, but also on the performance of the organization that they lead. But to have them responsible for the federal government's performance, or even the agency's performance, when a lot of that they have no control over, I see that trend to sort of do that in an amorphous way, and that strikes me as being a little bit unfair. And I think a lot of senior executives who really work hard and their organizations got tremendous results, but then they're marked down because the department as a whole didn't do well. I see a problem with that. But I do see that trend, what Angie just said about the federal government as a whole doing well.
I think it's part of driving the culture that we want. If we want to see ourselves as a cadre of SES professionals that are driving the government, then in a way, then we're one group together. And and if it becomes about individual performance, then we're competing sometimes against each other versus working together toward a common goal. So, you know, I mean, I suppose you could call it philosophical, but I'm just saying it from culturally. If we want to change a culture, then you got to pull together as a team, and you got to see it as a team as to how we progress.
Before I ask the next question, are there any questions from the audience? Sir.
We've talked about awards for SES and rewards and motivating them. Sometimes it's small things. I think back, there was a time when you got a presidential rank award, you got it from the president. That hasn't happened in years and years. There are limits on the percentage of SES that were eligible for PRAs. PRAs last year and this year, the request for nominations came out late, kind of like as a last thought. Last year, they gave about, I think it was about a third of what was authorized as far as the percentage. So not 1% was distinguished, about 1/3 or 1%.
It was actually a little higher than that, but it was lower.
So what does that tell you, with existing authorities, and in the case of the president, without spending another dime, what does that tell you? What's the message to the senior executive service?
Yeah, I received a presidential rank award a few years ago, and I can tell you that it was a big deal to me. And I had a discussion with a couple of folks in my agency at the time who also had gotten rank awards in the last couple of years. And I asked a question, and I was I wasn't really surprised at the answer. I said, if you had your choice of an award of money, or you had the option of the rank award being the President of the United States gives you the award personally, and it's an honorary award, it doesn't have money, which would you take? And 2 of 3 people said they would shake hands with the president and have him say thank you for what they did over the money, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I was in that camp. Although it was a nice down payment on a car, I would have taken the thank you from the president personally over the cash.
Yeah. The Senior Executives Association has been well aware of that development the last few years, and we have fought against it. And we have fought to be able to release the names of the award winners, which is the Distinguished Rank Award winners were just released 2 weeks ago when SEA had its Distinguished Executives Banquet, and the request for new nominations does come out late. This year there were 54 award winners. Last year they were in the 60s, and these are people that, as a group, this 1% Distinguished Rank Award winner saves the American taxpayers $36 billion in documented savings. So it is a significant accomplishment, and I personally am proud of those senior executives, and I think they deserve to be congratulated.
We work in a political environment. I assume everyone here agrees that it's a fairly politicized environment these days. The Distinguished Rank Award comes with a cash award of 35% of base pay. So we're looking at awards of $50,000, $60,000 for a Distinguished Rank Award. How do you handle the politics of handing out an award to a federal employee when the award is more than the average pay of households in this country, or of wage earners in this country? How do we deal with that? I mean, it is a political issue too, I think, isn't it?
Only if you make it one.
But isn't everything made one now?
A few years ago, it wasn't an issue. These names were broadcast. People were congratulated, and now they're not. So, I mean, when you add up all the presidential Distinguished Rank Award winners that save $36 billion, it comes to about $4 million in cost total. That's what we pay, and that's a tremendous investment for the American people. I mean, isn't that, it depends on how you present it. But right now, it's kind of like, well, let's push them over to the side, sweep them under the carpet. We won't really talk about them, and, except when we have to. And I guess that's, what message does that send to the very best, that they're almost an embarrassment because the bonus is too high. I don't think that's the right message.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Ellen?
All wave your magic wands and make all these other political and other issues go away. I still am struck by, if we're going to reshape the senior executive service, there's that whole cadre of leaders from GS5 on up to 15 that we need to teach those leadership skills to. And I'd love to hear some conversation from all of you in terms of, how do we begin really to do a good job, number one, at developing leaders at lower grade levels, and two, how do you assess them? How do you, that application process you talked about, Angie, how do you know that the people you're getting have the technical skills and the leadership skills?
From a leadership development standpoint, it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I fundamentally believe that we need to, in some ways I call it the Marine Corps model, but that is that, or it's really kind of the military model, which is everyone walking in the door, I think, is really kind of assumed to be a leader and then is taught leadership, versus the civilians. I think we think you have to reach a magical 11, 12, 13, or 14 before we develop you as a leader. So one of the things that we're working in that we're really proud of within the Office of Personnel Management is taking a look at it from leadership from the ground up, that it's not just about the higher grades, but actually training folks and giving them opportunities. It's not just about training. I mean, you do not need to just sit in a classroom and learn leadership. You have to actually be given things. I'll give you an example. One of the things we do is we have a thing, it's a leadership team building that we do within Employee Services, the function that I oversee. And to create that leadership and team building, we hire no consultants, we hire no contractors, we do it all completely ourselves. And guess who does it all? The employees. And some of them are GS7s that have done this, some are GS11s, some are GS15s, but they all pull together, and we've delivered all kinds of things that, and they come in and they get guidance and stuff and mentoring and coaching from those who have been there before or from the leaders, but it's the employees themselves. So what do they get out of that? They don't get a reward, by the way, at the end of this. They do not get an award for it. Their award is, or their reward is the fact that they led something, and that all of us, whether we're SES or 15s or whatever, we're marching behind that GS7 who's, explaining something to us about the Battle of Gettysburg and things like that. So it's all about developing folks at the lowest levels and seeing everyone in your organization as having the potential of being a leader, and then you prepare them, I think, as they progress. And once they get there, then they're really well prepared because they've kind of worked out the kinks and they've found out what type of leader they are. Because it's not textbook, and it's situational, and things come up, and sometimes you have to deliver and make decisions, and other times you have to be collaborative, but you have to give them what I'll call a safe environment in order to figure that all out before they reach the 14 and 15 level and are actually faced with many of these decisions. So I say courtesy of Department of Defense. They gave me that opportunity, where I was given that. So that's probably where I learned it, being exposed to the military. That's another place that I learned it, because I just think it's smart to give people those opportunities and let them test themselves out before we go.
One of the things that the military does exceptionally well is training leaders.
They train their officers.
Yes.
No, they train their
They train NCOs
NCOs
too. Everybody in the military is considered to be a leader or potential leader. They all get training that makes them better equipped to lead. And one of the reasons is, in combat, you might have 3 people who are officially in the lead, and those 3 people may be dead, and somebody else has to step into that role. You don't have the option of saying, well, sorry, the leaders are gone, we have to quit and go home.
Right.
And so they make certain that people understand that. And I think it really gets back to Ellen's question that it's actually, if we start looking at, we all want to do leader development. We all want to train people who are in SES positions. We talk about moving SESs around to get them experience. But the reality is, an SES who's never moved as an SES, but worked in 5 different agencies as a 5, a 7, a 9, 11, up through the 15 level, and who has that kind of experience is probably better equipped to be an SES. And the development of a senior executive isn't done when they're a senior executive. It's
Yeah.
done when you're a GS5 or a GS11 or a GS12 or 14. And I think if we put more of our emphasis on helping develop this federal workforce and not trying to focus on 7,000 senior executives, we probably will get better results. Even the people who don't make it to SES will be better GS14s and 15s. And I think what we'll
Right.
find is that will actually reshape the senior executive service, not trying to deal with the 7,000 people who are SESs right now.
I think it's both, but I couldn't agree more on developing them from the bottom up. When you ask about the leadership assessments, one of the things that I'd like to see us start doing, and I just started doing this just as kind of like an experiment, if you will, just to see. But when you get in the interviews, stop asking about the technical stuff, and instead kind of go to the heart and soul of the person and find out things about them. When do they do their best thinking? There might be some people that are interviewing for an SES position that might say, well, how I do my best thinking is I let my employees do the best thinking, and then I empower them, and then, we come up with something. Really? As an SES, I'm kind of thinking I'd like you to think, And so one of the things that, we're really looking for is, when do you think? And what do you do with those ideas, Because quite
All the
frankly,
time.
but with our jobs, half the time we don't have, you'd be surprised. For me, it's walking my dog Tank. In fact, my deputy associate directors, I'm pretty sure they want to kidnap my dog right now, because afterwards they get little notes that say, random thoughts while walking the dog. And then it just spills out all these things I'd really like us to do. But the point is that assessing, I think our assessments of leaders needs to be of the whole person. It needs to be about these intrinsic values. It needs to be about, why are you in this job? Why do you really want it? I remember General Scott asked me one time what my career goals were. I was a 14 at the time. I said I wanted to be an SES, and he said, why? And I didn't have an answer for him. I couldn't even think of why I wanted to be an SES. And so he said, then you're not ready. And I was like, he's so right. And so I spent the next 4 years figuring out, why do I really, really want to be an SES? And I'm just saying, for me, it was not about the pay. It was not about the rewards, the bonuses. Heck, I didn't even know what they were. It was really about this fact that I just was coming off fresh of a master's degree in leadership, and I really wanted to try it out on a few folks. And so, now I have like 320 folks to try it out on. But anyhow, it's been fun, and it's been a journey, and I've learned just as much from my 14s and 15s, especially my non-supervisory 15s, who, by the way, do not want to be SES. And I love them, and I love what they bring to the table, and it's just a really good match.
Bill, any last comments from you?
Yeah, I just pick up on this training and development assessment theme. It occurs to me that while all these things are great thoughts, that we don't have any sort of comprehensive government-wide standard. We don't even have a really supervisory training required everywhere or implemented everywhere. So how do we do this in a way that you sort of have an expectation? And the one thing that I've noticed is that there are many, many, many opportunities for civil servants to develop leadership skills. For example, leading a task force. And then somebody will go out and get an assignment like that, and then there's no way of like memorializing how well they did and capturing the benefits of that experience, so that someone somewhere will say, oh, look at how well they did on that, they're ready for a promotion. Or there's no leadership file, whereas if you're in the military, there's a record kept of it. And so I think that we have to like go and figure out, how do we develop this system so we have the training and we can figure it out and we can go capture it and then evaluate it when it makes a difference.
I had I participated in a session last week with a gentleman who was a senior civil servant in England, in the UK. And he talked about the fact that the senior civil service positions there are very well respected, that it's it's viewed as a high calling, and they actually, he said, have a little over 100 political positions, and so key positions in agencies are held by career civil servants. I don't think we'll ever get to that point in this country, but I can tell you, as someone who's been on the political side and on the career side as an SES, that the federal workforce that we have today is a great strength of our government, and they deserve the best, most capable leadership that they can get. And I think the decisions that are made by OPM and our political leadership on the Hill and in the administration over the next few years are going to be really important in reshaping the SES and making certain that federal workforce gets the caliber of leadership and maintains the caliber of leadership they really need. With that, I will say my thanks to Angie and to Bill for your insights and participation, and to all of you for listening today. Thank you very much.